The kingdom of Virolith did not whisper fear. It breathed it. It wore it like a second skin, stitched into the cloaks of nobles and the collars of servants. The very stones of its black roads remembered the weight of armies that had marched to conquer and never marched back. At its center, in a citadel that pierced the clouds like a broken fang, stood a throne carved from obsidian bone. It had been hewn from the skeleton of a creature so ancient that even the oldest wolves had forgotten its name. Upon that throne sat a queen no one dared to love, only obey. Myrene, the Lycan Queen. She was not born into softness, not raised to nurture. Her mother had been a conqueror, her grandmother a warlord. The blood in her veins carried conquest like a fever, and her crown was forged not in ceremony, but in war. Her enemies called her cruel, or her allies called her inevitable. And her subjects? They called her evil, but Myrene preferred a different word, unchallenged. This is the story of the men she collected, the kings she broke, the alphas she bent, the warriors who came to her court in chains and learned that there were fates worse than death. This is the story of Logan, the last alpha of the Ashborn pack, who knelt in the ruins of his world and discovered that hatred was not the opposite of devotion. It was the beginning of it. This is the story of a curse older than memory, a ritual written in blood, and a queen who, for one terrifying, world-shattering moment, chose to be human. And this is what happened when the ancient power that sustained her returned to collect its due. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan kings, forbidden mates, Naira and stories that make your heart ache, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for epic Lycan King romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The fall of an alpha. The night Logan lost everything began with fire. His pack lands had been green that morning. The Ashborn territory stretched for miles across the northern valleys, ancient forests, cold rivers, hills that turned silver under the full moon. He had stood at the edge of the clan circle, his chest bare, his people gathered behind him, and he had believed himself untouchable. He had been wrong. The Lycan army descended without warning. No war horns, no parley, just shadows moving through the trees, silent as wolves and twice as hungry. By the time Logan reached the eastern border, the first of his sentries were already dead. He fought. Gods, he fought. He tore through Lycan soldiers with claws and fang and fury. His beta fell beside him, Eric, who had raised him after his father's death, who had taught him to hunt and to lead and to never, ever show fear. Logan watched Eric's eyes go dark, and something inside him shattered. He fought harder, but strength meant nothing against inevitability. The Lycan army did not fight like wolves. They fought like a machine, each soldier knowing his place, each formation designed not to kill quickly, but to corral, to trap, to exhaust. They herded him toward the center of his own burning village, and by the time Logan realized he was being driven, not attacked, it was too late. He knelt in the ash, his claws bloodied to the knuckle, his breath ragged in his chest. Smoke curled into the sky like dying prayers. Around him, the remnants of his pack knelt in chains or lay motionless beneath the rubble. The Ashborn sigil, a silver wolf's skull, had been torn from the great hall and trampled into the mud. Logan's muscles burned, his vision blurred, but he kept his spine straight, even on his knees, because he was an alpha, and alphas did not bow. Not until she came. Queen Myrene stepped through the smoke like a blade drawn from a wound. She was taller than he had imagined. The stories painted her as a monster, a beast with fangs and claws and the hunger of 100 wolves. But the woman who stood before him was something far more terrible. She was beautiful. Silver hair cascaded over her shoulders like moonlight given form. Her armor was black and fitted, carved from the scales of something that had once swum in dark waters. Her face was sharp, elegant, minor and utterly without mercy. But it was her eyes that stopped Logan's breath. Crimson, not the red of blood or anger, a deeper red, the color of embers that had burned so long they had forgotten what it meant to be cold. She looked at him the way a storm looks at a village before it strikes, not with hatred, with inevitability. "You lost," she said. The words were simple, final. They did not gloat. They did not mock. They were simply truth, spoken by a queen who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Logan spat blood onto the ash between them. The copper taste filled his mouth, and he welcomed it. It reminded him he was still alive. "Kill me," he growled. The words came out rough, raw, a command, not a plea. He would not beg. He would not let her see the grief that clawed at his chest. Eric's face, the scent of his pack's blood, the weight of every wolf he had failed to protect. For a long moment, Marine did not move. She simply watched him, her head tilted slightly as though he were a puzzle she had not expected to find. Then she smiled. "No." The word chilled him more than death ever could. She stepped closer. The soldiers around her did not move, but Logan felt a shift in the air, the weight of her presence pressing against his chest, his throat, his lungs. "I claim you," she said, "not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, as property." Logan's claws dug into the ash. Rage surged through him, hot, blinding, the kind of rage that had made his father a legend and his grandfather a terror. He lunged. He never reached her. Two Lycan guards caught him before he could rise, their hands like iron on his shoulders, forcing him back to his knees. He thrashed, snarling. Yeah, but his body was spent, his muscles shredded, his will frayed to a thread. Marine watched his struggle with that same quiet amusement. Then she reached down and with one finger tilted his chin up. Her touch was cold. "You will learn," she said softly, "that hatred is a gift I give freely. It sharpens the ones I keep." She released him and turned away, her silver hair catching the firelight. "Take him to the palace. If he fights, break his legs. If he dies." She paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "Find another." The consort's chains. The palace of Virolith was not built for comfort. It was built to remind everyone who entered that they were small. Logan learned that in the first hour, as guards dragged him through corridors that stretched impossibly high, their ceilings lost in shadow. Black marble pillars rose like the ribs of some great beast. Blue flames flickered in braziers along the walls, casting no warmth, only an eerie, shifting light that made every shadow seem alive. He was not taken to a dungeon. That surprised him. Instead, the guards brought him to a suite of rooms, lavish by any standard, with a bed large enough for four, a hearth that crackled with actual wood, and windows that looked out over the dark city below. A servant waited inside, head bowed, a tray of food in her hands. Logan stood in the doorway, chains still on his wrists, and stared. "What is this?" His voice came out hoarse. The servant did not look up. "Your chambers, my lord." "I'm not a lord." She flinched. "Forgive me. The queen's consorts are granted these rooms." The word hit him like a blow. Consort. He had heard the rumors, of course. Every alpha in the Northern Territories knew the stories, that the Lycan Queen collected defeated kings like trophies, keeping them in her palace for reasons no one could agree on. Some said she fed on their power. Some said she used them for breeding, to strengthen her bloodline. Others whispered darker things, rituals, sacrifices, magic that required the lifeblood of alphas to sustain her throne. Logan had dismissed it all as fear-mongering. Now he stood in a gilded cage and the rumors felt uncomfortably real. "Take off the chains," he said. The servant hesitated. I am not permitted." "Then find someone who is." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Even chained, even broken, the alpha in him would not be denied. The servant fled. She returned minutes later with a man. He was tall, nor broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell to his jaw, and eyes the color of old gold. He wore no chains, but there was a quietness to him, a stillness that Logan recognized. It was the stillness of a wolf who had learned to hide his teeth. "I'm Kale," the man said, "former alpha of the Stonebreaker territory, current occupant of the room next to yours." He held up a key, crossed to Logan's wrists, and unlocked the chains without ceremony. The cuffs fell away with a clatter, and Logan's arms dropped to his sides, the sudden lightness almost painful. "Welcome to the menagerie," Kyle said dryly. Logan rubbed his wrists, staring at the other man. "You're a consort. One of 6. 7 now, counting you." Kyle moved to the window, his gaze distant. "We are collected, displayed, used as she sees fit." "Used how?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "What you'll learn." Logan's fist clenched. "I'm not staying." A soft laugh escaped Kyle, not mocking, but tired, hollow. "We all said that." A third figure appeared in the doorway. He was lean, sharp-featured, with the cold precision of a blade. His hair was the color of winter straw, and his eyes held a hardness that spoke of old battles and older losses. "You will," he said, and his voice was ice. Logan turned to face him. "Who are you?" "Dorian." The name came like a challenge. "The Queen's advisor, some call me. Her keeper, others say. I prefer survivor." He stepped into the room, his movements deliberate, controlled. Unlike Kale, who wore his resignation like a cloak, Dorian carried himself with the coiled tension of a wolf waiting for an opening. "This palace doesn't let go," Dorian said, his eyes fixed on Logan. "And neither does she. You can fight. You can rage. You can spend your nights dreaming of escape. It won't matter." He paused and something flickered in his gaze, something almost like warning. "The sooner you accept that, the longer you'll last." Logan stared at him, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "How long have you been here?" Dorian smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. 3 years, and I was the alpha of the Winterfang, the largest pack in the eastern reaches." He inclined his head. "So you see, Alpha Logan, strength is not what matters here. Obedience is." He turned and left without another word, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Kyle let out a breath, some of his composure slipping. "Ignore him. Dorian has been here the longest. It's made him careful." "Careful," Logan repeated. "What, you mean broken?" Kyle's eyes met his. "I mean alive. There's a difference." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One piece of advice, from someone who learned the hard way. The Queen will test you. She'll find your weakness, your fear, your pride, and she will press until something breaks. Don't let it be your mind." He looked back at Logan, and for a moment the mask of indifference slipped, revealing something raw beneath. "The consorts who lose themselves don't last long." He left, and the door closed with a soft click, leaving Logan alone in the gilded room, with the fire crackling and the city spread out below, like a wound that had never healed. He stood there for a long time, staring at his reflection in the dark window. A stranger's face, hollow-eyed, smeared with ash and blood. Then he moved to the bed, sat down heavily, and for the first time since his father's death, Logan allowed himself to grieve. The Queen's game. Myrene did not summon them often, but when she did, they came. It was the 3rd morning of Logan's captivity when a servant arrived at his door with a single command. The throne hall. Dawn. He dressed in the clothes left for him, black silk, soft as water, with the silver wolf of Virulith embroidered over the heart. It felt like a brand. The other consorts were already assembled when he arrived. They stood in a loose line before the obsidian throne, 7 men in black and silver, their faces carefully blank. Logan recognized Kale and Dorian among them. The others he knew only by rumor. Rurik, a mountain of a man with scars crisscrossing his hands. Finn, young and sharp-eyed, who watched everything with the focus of a hawk. Theron, one whose quiet stillness seemed carved from grief. And Caius, who smiled too easily and never met anyone's eyes. They did not speak to each other. They did not need to. The tension in the room was a living thing, coiled and waiting. Logan took his place at the end of the line, his jaw set. The throne hall was vast, larger than any building in his former territory. Pillars of obsidian rose like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces carved with scenes of conquest and sacrifice. The blue flames in the braziers cast dancing shadows across the floor, making the marble seem to move, to breathe. And above it all, the throne sat empty, waiting. She came from the shadows behind the throne, and the air changed. Logan had felt many things in his life: the surge of battle, the weight of command, the hollow ache of loss. But he had never felt presence like this. It pressed against his skin, his lungs, his mind. Not magic exactly, but something older, something that recognized him as prey. Myrene descended the steps slowly, her silver hair unbound, her black gown trailing behind her like spilled ink. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes, those impossible crimson eyes, moved over the consorts with the precision of a blade seeking flesh. She reached the bottom of the steps and began to circle them. Slowly, deliberately. She passed behind each man, and Logan watched their reactions. Kyle's shoulders stiffened. Dorian's breath caught almost imperceptibly. The others held themselves still, but he could see the tension in their hands, the slight flare of nostrils, the way their eyes tracked her even when they pretended not to. When she was not looking at them as people. She was inspecting them, evaluating them, the way a predator assesses its prey before the hunt. When she reached Logan, she stopped. The silence stretched. He could feel her gaze on the back of his neck, cold and assessing. He did not turn. He did not move. He stared straight ahead at the empty throne and refused to give her the satisfaction of a flinch. "You all live," she said finally, her voice carrying through the hall without effort. "Because you are useful." She resumed her circuit, her words falling like stones into still water. "Your strength feeds this kingdom. Your obedience keeps it stable. Your existence reminds every wolf who defies me what happens to alphas who think themselves equal to a queen." She stopped in front of Logan, her face inches from his. "Amri, let's see how long that lasts." Her gaze held his. He did not look away. He would not give her that. Something flickered in her eyes. Not anger. Interest. "You still believe you will escape," she murmured, so low that only he could hear. "That hatred will save you. That rage will be enough." She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "It won't." She turned away, ascending the steps to her throne, and the consorts were dismissed with a wave of her hand. As Logan walked back toward his chambers, Kale fell into step beside him. "You stared at her," Kale said quietly. "So? No one stares at her. Not like that." Kale's voice was tight. "You've marked yourself." Logan stopped, turning to face the other alpha. "I'm not playing her game." Kyle's expression was unreadable. "You don't have a choice." He walked on, already leaving Logan standing alone in the corridor, the echo of Myrene's words still ringing in his ears. Rivalry of survival favor was everything, and Myrene gave it sparingly. Logan learned this over the weeks that followed. The palace operated on a system of subtle rewards and devastating punishments, all calibrated to keep the consorts off balance, competing for scraps of approval that might mean the difference between comfort and agony. A glance from the queen during dinner could elevate a consort's status for days. A single word of praise could secure better rooms, better food, a reprieve from the endless drills and displays of obedience that filled their hours. But favor was a blade that cut both ways. One evening, Logan witnessed the cost. Caius, the smiling one, the one who never met anyone's eyes, made a mistake. As he spoke out of turn during a council session, offering an opinion on a military strategy when none had been requested. Myrene did not raise her voice. She did not gesture. She simply looked at him. The temperature in the room plummeted. Caius's face went white, his smile vanishing as though it had never existed. He dropped to his knees, gasping, his hands clawing at his throat. "Forgive me," he choked out. "Forgive me, my queen." The pressure lifted as suddenly as it had come. Caius collapsed, trembling, while Myrene turned back to her maps as though nothing had happened. That night, Caius was moved from his chambers to a cell in the lower levels. He was there for 3 days. When he emerged, he was thinner, paler, and he no longer smiled. But his eyes, those darting, evasive eyes, had changed. They were empty now, hollow. And Logan found Kale in the training yard that night, pounding his fists against a stone pillar until his knuckles bled. "He's gone," Kyle said without looking up. "Caius, he's not there anymore." "Not really." Logan watched the blood drip onto the stones. "What did she do to him?" "What she always does," Kyle's voice cracked. "She took what he loved most." He finally turned, and Logan saw the grief in his eyes, raw, unguarded. Caius had a daughter, a little girl, back in his territory. The queen found out. She didn't threaten the child. She didn't have to. She just let Caius know that she could, that his obedience wasn't just for himself. He laughed bitterly. And now he's perfect, obedient, broken. Logan's hands curled into fists. "How do you survive it?" Kyle looked at him for a long moment. I don't have anything left to take." He walked away, leaving Logan alone with the blood on the stones and the cold certainty that Marine's cruelty was not chaos. It was design. The cruelty of a queen. She summoned him alone on a night when the moon was hidden behind clouds and the palace seemed to hold its breath. The servant who came to his door offered no explanation, just a gesture and a path. Logan followed, his heart steady, his mind sharp. He had been in the palace for nearly 2 months. He had learned the corridors, the guard rotations, the patterns of the servants. He had memorized the face of every consort, cataloged their strengths and weaknesses. He had begun to build a map of the lower levels, the places no one spoke of, the doors that were always locked. He had not forgotten his vow. He would escape. He would find a way. But first, he had to survive. Her chambers were at the apex of the palace, a circular room with walls of black glass and a ceiling that opened to the sky. The moon was hidden, but the stars cast a pale, cold light across the floor. She stood by the window, her back to him, her silver hair loose over her shoulders. She wore a simple gown of dark gray, and without her armor, without her crown, she looked almost ordinary. Almost. "You hate me," she said. It was not a question. Logan stopped at the threshold, refusing to step closer. "Yes." She did not turn, but he saw her reflection in the glass, the curve of her lips, the tilt of her head. "Good." He frowned. The word made no sense. She turned then, slowly, and for the first time, he saw her not as a queen, not as a monster, but as something else entirely, something he could not name. "Hatred sharpens you," she said, moving toward him with that fluid, predatory grace. "Weakness dulls you, and I do not keep dull things." She stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the faint pulse at her throat, the way her crimson eyes caught the starlight. "You are not the first alpha to stand in this room and dream of killing me," she said. "You will not be the last. But you are the first who has not bothered to hide it." Logan's jaw tightened. "Should I?" "No." She smiled, and there was something almost like approval in it. Pretending is its own kind of weakness. She moved to a table where a decanter of dark wine sat waiting. She poured 2 glasses, offered one. He did not take it. She laughed softly, a sound that was almost human. "You think I would poison you? If I wanted you dead..." "Who, Logan, you would be dead. I do not need wine to accomplish what my claws cannot." He took the glass. Not because he trusted her, but because refusing would be fear, and he would not give her that. She raised her own glass, her eyes holding his. "To survival," she said. He did not drink. She did not seem to care. She moved to the window again, her back to him, and for a moment the mask slipped. He saw it, a flicker of something in her expression. Not sadness exactly. Something older. Something tired. "You think I enjoy this," she said quietly. "The games, the cruelty, the breaking of men who were once kings." "Don't you?" She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I do what is necessary. That's what every tyrant says." She turned, and there was something sharp in her gaze now, something dangerous. "You know nothing of what I have sacrificed to keep this kingdom standing. Nothing of the price I pay every day to hold back forces that would devour your people, your lands, your very memory from the world. She stepped closer, and he saw that her eyes were not just red, they were burning. Embers that had been kindled centuries ago, still smoldering beneath the surface. "You see a monster," she said. "I see a mirror. One day, Logan, you will understand that monsters are not born. They are made. And once made," she reached up and touched his face. A light touch, almost gentle. Her fingers were cold. "They cannot unmake themselves." She withdrew and the moment shattered. "You are dismissed." He left without a word, her words echoing in his skull. Monsters are not born. They are made. He did not sleep that night. The truth beneath the throne. The answer came slowly. Too slowly. Logan spent his nights exploring the palace's forgotten places, the corridors that servants avoided, the staircases that led nowhere, the doors that were never open. He learned the patterns of the guards, the times when the shadows were deepest, the ways that sound traveled through the ancient stone. And he listened, whispers in the dark, secrets the palace tried to bury. The consorts were not trophies. They were something else. It was Theron who gave him the first clue, not in words but in a look. The quiet alpha had been watching him for weeks, his grief-carved face unreadable. One night, when the others had retired, Theron caught Logan's arm in the corridor and pressed something into his hand. A key, old iron, worn smooth with age. "The door beneath the eastern stair," Theron whispered. "Go at midnight. Tell no one." Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Logan waited until the palace settled into its deepest silence. Then he moved. The door beneath the eastern stair was hidden so well that even Logan, with his weeks of exploration, had missed it. It was set into the wall behind a tapestry depicting the First Lycan War, its edges disguised by the carved stone frame. The key turned with a resistance that felt almost reluctant, as though the door itself did not want to open. Beyond it, darkness and stairs. He descended for what felt like hours, the air growing colder, heavier until the walls began to change. The smooth obsidian of the upper levels gave way to rough-hewn stone, carved with symbols he did not recognize. Ancient markings, older than Virolith, yet older perhaps than the wolves themselves. The stairs ended in a chamber. It was vast, a natural cavern that had been shaped, smoothed, and carved into something that was not quite a room and not quite a temple. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when he looked at them, patterns that hurt to focus on. And at the center was a ritual circle. It was carved directly into the stone floor, the grooves deep and worn, as though they had been used countless times. The design was intricate, spirals within spirals, runes in a language that made his teeth ache. And at the center, a shallow basin. The basin was stained, red, dried, flaking, but unmistakably blood. So much blood. Logan stood at the edge of the circle, his heart pounding, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he could not move. And the symbol seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. And in the darkness beyond the circle, he could see shapes. Bones, many bones, arranged in patterns that mirrored the carvings above. "You weren't supposed to find this," he spun. Marine stood at the entrance to the chamber, her silver hair unbound, her face pale in the dim light. She wore no armor, no crown. She looked, for the first time since he had met her, not like a queen. She looked afraid. "What is this?" Logan's voice was hoarse. "What are you doing to us?" She did not answer immediately. She moved into the chamber, her steps slow, almost reluctant, until she stood at the edge of the ritual circle, staring down at the stained basin. "My power is not endless," she said quietly. "There is a cost. There is always a cost." Logan stared at her, his mind racing. "The consorts, the rituals. You're feeding us to something." She looked up and for a moment her mask slipped completely. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. My throne is not secured by strength alone. There are forces older than this kingdom, older than the Lycan line, older than the wolves themselves. They demand balance. She gestured to the symbols on the walls, the bones arranged in the shadows. Every alpha who sits on the throne of Werewolf makes a bargain. Power for sacrifice. Life for life. I did not create this system, Logan. I inherited it. Her voice cracked on the last word, barely perceptible. And now I survive because I feed it. Logan's stomach twisted. And we're the payment. Her gaze met his, and he saw something there he had not expected. Shame. Yes, the Queen's curse. She told him everything, or enough. The curse had been woven into the Lycan bloodline 1,000 years ago, when the first queen had made her pact with the old gods, the ones who dwelt in the spaces between stars, the ones who demanded blood for power. Every queen since had been bound to the same bargain. Power beyond mortal wolves, the ability to command armies, to hold kingdoms together with sheer will, all of it came with a price. Every decade, the ritual required the lifeblood of an alpha. Not just any alpha, a king, a conqueror, a wolf whose strength could be harvested, whose essence could sustain the throne for another 10 years. The consorts were not trophies. They were livestock. How many? Logan's voice was barely a whisper. How many have you sacrificed? Myrene's jaw tightened. 7. Before you. 7 kings. 7 alphas. 7 men who would have torn my kingdom apart if I had let them live free. I gave them purpose before their end. You gave them death. I gave them meaning. Her voice rose, and for the first time, he heard the rage beneath the ice. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I chose to become this? She turned away, her hands gripping the edge of the basin, her knuckles white. My mother was the same. Her mother before her. We are born to this curse, raised to be monsters, because if we are not monsters, the kingdom falls. The old gods rise. Everything your pack died for, everything your father built, everything you have ever loved, it all disappears. She looked back at him, and her eyes were wet. I am not evil, Logan. I am necessary. He stared at her, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. And what happens to me? He asked quietly. When the ritual comes? She did not answer. She did not have to. The calendar in his chambers, the careful tracking of days, the way the other consorts watched him with pity and fear. It all made sense now. He was next. How long? He demanded. She met his gaze. 3 months. 3 months until his blood stained that basin. 3 months until his life fed whatever ancient horror lurked beneath the throne. 3 months to escape. He turned and left without another word, her voice following him into the darkness. Logan? He stopped. The ritual cannot be stopped. If I try to defy it, the old gods will not just take me. They will take everything, your pack lands, your people. Every memory of Ashbourne will be erased from the world. He looked back at her, standing in the center of the circle, her silver hair glowing faintly in the sickly light. Then maybe, he said, you should have thought of that before you built your throne on the bones of kings. He climbed the stairs and did not look back. Alleys and chains. Everything changed after that. The rivalry did not disappear. Logan still felt the sharp edges of competition, the subtle ways the consorts jockeyed for favor, the way some looked at him with suspicion now that he spent more time in the shadows than in the light. But something shifted. Now they understood. They were not competing for comfort. They were racing against time. Kyle was the first to come to him. You found the chamber, he said, not a question. He stood in the doorway of Logan's room, his face tight with something between fear and hope. Logan nodded. You knew. Theron told me, before Caius broke. Kyle stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He's been watching for years, mapping the ritual, looking for a way to disrupt it. Is there one? Cale's expression was grim. Maybe, but it requires all of us. Not just one alpha, not just two, all of us, together. Logan's eyes narrowed. The others, they'll never agree. They might if they know what's coming. Kyle's voice hardened. Dorian has been here the longest. He's seen two rituals. He knows that when the time comes, the queen chooses one consort, the others watch, and then they wait for their turn. He met Logan's eyes. We don't have to be next, but only if we stop competing and start fighting together. It took weeks to bring the others in. Rurik, the scarred mountain of a man, was the easiest. His rage had never faded, only festered. He joined the moment Logan explained the ritual. Finn, the sharp-eyed hawk, was harder. He had learned to survive by staying small, by never drawing attention. But he had also seen the chamber, had counted the bones, and his eyes held a terror that would not let him rest. Theron, who had given Logan the key, needed no convincing. He had lost his mate to this palace, and grief had honed him into a weapon. And Dorian was the hardest. You're fools, he said, standing by the window of the common room, his back to the others. All of you. You think rebellion will save you? You think you can fight something that has stood for 1,000 years? I think I'd rather die fighting than bleed out on an altar, Logan said. Dorian turned, and for the first time, Logan saw the cracks in the mask, the terror beneath the cold. I've survived 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years of watching, of waiting, of pretending. I've learned things, secrets that could destroy this palace, secrets that could free us. Then why haven't you used them? Dorian's laugh was hollow. Because I was afraid, because I thought if I stayed quiet, if I was useful, she might spare me. He looked at the others. Kyle, Rurik, Finn, Theron. 5 alphas who had once ruled territories, commanded armies, shaped the world. But she won't, he said. None of us are safe. None of us ever were. He moved to the table where the others sat, his hands flat on the surface. The ritual isn't just about sacrifice, it's about control. The queen's power is tied to the circle. If we can break it, if we can destroy the symbols, disrupt the binding, the old gods will withdraw. Her power will crumble. And her? Logan asked. Dorian's eyes were hard. She dies, or she becomes mortal. Either way, the curse ends. A heavy silence settled over the room. We have 2 months, Logan said. We need a plan. For the first time since he had arrived at the palace, Logan felt something other than rage. Hope. The war within. Maureen noticed the change. Of course she did. She summoned Logan to her chambers more frequently now, sometimes to discuss strategy, sometimes to question him about his pack, sometimes simply to watch him with those crimson eyes that saw too much. You're different, she said one evening, as rain lashed against the windows of her tower. Logan stood by the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. Lycan, how so? You've stopped fighting. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the cold radiating from her skin. You've become quiet. I've learned. Have you? She tilted her head, studying him. Or have you simply found a new way to resist? His heart quickened, but he kept his face still. Does it matter? She was silent for a long moment. Then she did something she had never done before. She reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold, colder than any living thing should be. But the touch was not cruel. It was almost hesitant. You think I enjoy this, she said softly, echoing her words from weeks before. You've asked me that before. And you didn't answer. Logan looked at her, really looked, not at the queen, not at the monster, but at the woman standing beside him, her silver hair loose, her face unguarded. I don't know, he said honestly. She laughed, a quiet, breathless sound that was almost surprised. Honesty, from an alpha. How rare. She moved away from him, returning to the window where the rain streaked the glass like tears. I was 15 when I took the throne, she said, her voice distant. My mother died in the war against the southern clans. I watched her fall, watched her blood soak into the earth, and then I felt it, the curse settling into my bones, the power flooding into me, the voices of the old gods whispering in my ear. She pressed her palm against the glass. I didn't choose this. I was born into it. And every day since, I have done things that would make the wolves of your pack weep. I have sacrificed. I have killed. I have become a monster so that my kingdom could survive. She turned to face him, and for a moment, the mask was gone. He saw the girl she had been, 15, terrified, alone in a world that demanded she be merciless. But you, she said, you are different. You look at me with hatred, yes, but also with something else. Something I haven't seen in a long time. What? Pity. The word hung in the air between them. Logan did not deny it. You could stop, he said quietly. The ritual, the sacrifices. You could choose differently. Her laugh was bitter. And let the old gods tear this world apart. Let everything my ancestors built crumble to dust. Maybe there's another way. She shook her head slowly. There is no other way. There never was. But as she looked at him, something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. Go, she said, turning back to the window. It's before I say something I'll regret. Logan left, her words echoing in his mind. You look at me with pity. He did not know if that was true, but he knew that something had changed, that the hatred he had carried for so long had begun to crack, to shift, to become something he did not have a name for. It terrified him. The unraveling. The truth broke the kingdom. It began subtly, a tremor in the foundations, a crack in the obsidian throne. The blue flames in the braziers flickered and dimmed. Servants whispered of nightmares, of shadows that moved on their own, of a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. The old gods had begun to stir, and the ritual was nearing completion. Logan felt it in his bones, a pull toward the chamber beneath the palace, a hunger that was not his own. The curse was calling to him, marking him, and preparing him for the sacrifice. He had 3 days. The circle is weakening, Dorian said, as the consorts gathered in the common room for the last time. The queen's power is fracturing. If we strike now, we might succeed. Might? Finn's voice was sharp. The old gods are waking. If we break the circle, they will turn on her, on us, on everything. Dorian's face was grim. This is not a clean escape. It is a war. Logan stood at the head of the table, his hands flat on the surface. We have no choice. Either we fight or we die on that altar, one by one, until none of us are left. He looked at each of them. Cal, Rurik, Finn, Theron, Dorian. 5 alphas who had come to this place as enemies and learned to become something more. Tomorrow night, he said, we end this. The choice of a queen. The chamber burned with power. And when Logan descended the stairs for the last time, he found the ritual circle already glowing, a sickly, pulsing light that cast everything in shades of crimson and shadow. The symbols on the walls writhed, alive, hungry, and Myrene stood at the center. She was not the woman who had touched his hand in the tower. She was the queen, armored, crowned, her silver hair bound tight, her face a mask of cold command. But her hands were shaking. Behind her, the other consorts were restrained, bound by chains of light that pulsed in rhythm with the circle, forced to watch. Logan stepped into the chamber, and the door closed behind him. This ends tonight, she said. He met her gaze. Then end it. For a long moment, they stared at each other. The ritual circle hummed, the power building, the old gods pressing against the walls of reality, demanding their due. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. For what I have to do. Logan took a step forward. You don't have to do anything. You don't understand. If I don't complete the ritual, the old gods will... Let them come. She stared at him. Let them come, he repeated. Let them try to tear this world apart. Let them try to take your throne. But do not stand there and tell me that the only way to survive is to become what they want you to be. He took another step. You said monsters are made, not born. Then unmake yourself. Her hands trembled. The circle pulsed brighter, faster, the pressure in the room becoming unbearable. I can't, she whispered. If I stop, everything dies. Maybe, Logan's voice was steady, but maybe not. Maybe there's another way. Maybe the old gods are not as strong as they want you to believe. Maybe the curse has been alive from the beginning, a story told by queens who were too afraid to find the truth. He reached the edge of the circle, close enough to touch her. But you will never know, Myrene. You will never be free. You will spend eternity on that throne, feeding the darkness until there is nothing left of you but the monster. She closed her eyes. The circle screamed. And then she stepped out. Myrene stepped out of the circle. The magic lashed out violently, tendrils of crimson light whipping through the chamber, striking the walls, the ceiling, the chained consorts. The symbols on the walls began to crumble, the ancient stone cracking, the bones in the shadows turning to dust. You can't stop it, Kyle shouted, his chain straining. The ritual will complete itself. Myrene stumbled, her armor cracking, her face pale. The power of the curse was turning inward, feeding on her, consuming her. But she smiled. I can change it. She raised her hands, and for a moment, she was not the Lycan Queen. She was just a woman, tired, terrified, but free. She began to speak. Words that had not been spoken in 1,000 years. Words that belonged to a language older than the wolves, older than the old gods themselves. Words that unwove the curse thread by thread. The ritual circle shattered. The power that had been building for centuries erupted in a wave of blinding light, and Myrene screamed as it tore through her, ancient forces raging against her defiance. Logan broke free of the chains that had bound him, the magic dissolving as the circle died, and rushed toward her. And he caught her as she fell. Why? He demanded, his arms around her weight terrifyingly light. Why did you stop? Her eyes, no longer cold, no longer cruel, met his. Because I'm tired, she whispered. And then the light consumed them both. The breaking of chains. When Logan opened his eyes, the chamber was dark. The ritual circle was gone, the stone floor smooth and unmarked, as though it had never existed. The bones in the shadows had crumbled to dust, and the symbols on the walls had faded, leaving only bare rock. Myrene lay beside him, still, her face pale, her armor cracked and broken. For a terrible moment, he thought she was dead. Then her chest rose, a breath, another. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. The others were stirring, Kyle pulling himself upright, Rurik shaking off the last of the chains, Finn and Theron helping Dorian to his feet. They looked at the empty chamber, at the fallen queen, at each other. Is it over? Finn's voice was barely a whisper. Logan looked at Myrene, at the woman who had been a monster, a queen, a curse, a choice. It's beginning, he said. The queen who chose. The throne of Virolith did not remain empty, but it changed. Myrene ruled still, but differently. Her power had diminished. The curse that had sustained her for centuries was broken, leaving her mortal, vulnerable, human in ways she had never been. The kingdom that had once trembled at her name now watched her with something new, uncertainty and hope. The consorts were no longer prisoners. They could leave if they chose. Some did. Rurik and Finn departed within the week, returning to territories that had long since been absorbed into Virolith's borders, seeking to rebuild what they had lost. But others stayed. Cal remained as an advisor, his sharp mind and steady hand proving invaluable, as Myrene navigated a world without the curse. Theron stayed too, though he kept to the shadows, watching, waiting, his grief slowly easing into something like peace. Dorian surprised them all by staying as well. When Logan asked why, he smiled. A real smile, the first Logan had ever seen on his face. 3 years I spent hiding, he said. I think I'd like to see what happens when I stop. And Logan? He stayed. Not because he was bound, not because he was a prisoner, but because in the months that followed, he had come to understand something that had seemed impossible when he first knelt in the ashes of his packlands. Myrene was not evil. She was broken, twisted by a curse that had been forced upon her before she was old enough to understand it, shaped into a monster by powers older than memory. But she had chosen to break free, and in doing so, she had given them all a chance to be something more than what the world had made them. She found him on the balcony that overlooked the city, the moon rising full and silver over the spires of Wirelith. "You're still here," she said. He did not turn. "So are you." She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder almost touching his. She was dressed simply now. No armor, no crown. Her silver hair was loose and her eyes, no longer crimson, had faded to a soft, warm gray. "The council is worried," she said. "Without the curse, the borders are vulnerable. The old enemies are stirring." "Let them stir," she smiled faintly. "You sound like a king." "I was a king. And now?" He turned to look at her. The woman who had been a monster, who had broken his world and rebuilt it in her image, who had taken everything from him and given him something he had never expected. A choice. "Now," he said, "I'm something else." She held his gaze, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had been, enemies, captor and captive, monster and victim, seemed to fall away. "I never apologize," he said quietly, "for what I did to your pack, to your people." "No," he agreed, "I won't. Not because I'm not sorry, but because words are cheap. Apologies mean nothing without action." She looked out at the city, the kingdom she had ruled with fear and blood and sacrifice. "Oh, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making this right. Not because I deserve redemption, but because the world deserves something better than what I gave it." Logan watched her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the moon. "Then I'll stay," he said, "to make sure you do." She laughed, soft, surprised, almost human. "That seems fair." They stood together in silence, the wind carrying the scent of rain in distant forests. The kingdom of Virolith spread out below them like a wound beginning to heal. It would not be easy. There would be wars to fight, enemies to face, ghosts to lay to rest. The old gods had not been destroyed, only driven back, waiting, hungrier than ever. But for the first time in 1,000 years, the Lycan throne was not built on bones, and the queen who sat upon it had chosen to be more than a monster. So she had chosen to be human. On the night the moon turned crimson once more, the ancient power returned, stronger, hungrier, and this time, it did not want consorts, it wanted the queen herself. It's of Audiobook for more dark fantasy tales of power, betrayal, and the monsters we choose to become. Subscribe and turn on notifications.